I'm going to start by having you say and spell your complete name.
Ruso Perkins, Ruso Perkins.
And your position in the unit you served in?
Well, I finally came out as the supply sergeant, as staff sergeant.
In what unit?
Company I, the 87th.
Okay. You want to tell me a little bit about how you came to serve in the 10th?
Yes, my wife and I were married April 6, 1942. We went up to Stowe on our honeymoon, and I took a lesson of Henry Semino, who had returned from instructing paraski outfit at Alta, Utah. And I took a lesson of him, and I told him I had to go in service April 20th. And he wondered what I was interested in, and I said, I really don't know. Well, probably not because of my skiing, but he said, we'll write you a letter for the National Ski Patrol. And then I went home and got 2 other letters from 2 fellows who weren't sure whether I skied or not, but anyway, I came in through the National Ski Patrol.
Did you know what was in those letters?
I have copies of them at home, but I don't remember, I'm sorry. I think I have copies. Yeah.
Did they attest, I assume perhaps you were an outdoors person?
Well, I could ski. I guess that was all. Nothing other than that.
So what was your impression upon coming into the ski troops? What was your impression?
Well, of course, I took my basic at Camp Roberts, California, and went up to Fort Lewis, along with, I think, 11 other fellows. And that was my first exposure to the high mountains, large trees, and so forth of other parts of our country. And I was one of the first members of Company I-87th because the 3rd Battalion was just forming.
Was it what you expected it to be?
Well, I really had no knowledge or thoughts of anything other than a little that I had read, of course, in probably ski magazine, probably newspapers.
What influenced you the most about wanting to be part of the 10th?
Well, I really didn't have any thoughts or anything, and I didn't know anyone else who was going in, except as soon as we got up to Lewis, of course. I met the others and found out that I probably would be the poorest skier of the 12 or 15 that had started because, well, there were instructors and there were a couple of fellows from Austria there, and so it was quite an experience being from a small village to be exposed to people like this, men like this.
Did you have a sense that you were skiing with some pretty amazing skiers?
Oh yes, because and the first time we skied up there, we went up on the glacier, Mount Rainier, on the weekend. That was the first I had ever been on any kind of mountain that amounted to much, you know. And of course, some of those fellows were zooming down through there. I couldn't do that, but it was a great experience.
Did you eventually end up zooming through things like that?
I never got to be that. Skiing with these fellows, you know. I love to ski, and if the sun is out, I love it.
When you think about your time training up there, what kind of stands out as a pretty memorable part of that?
At Lewis or Hale?
At Lewis?
I went from Lewis down, well actually I could type, and so I went right in the orderly room of I Company, and so that was, I was not out on many of the maneuvers or so forth, but I did the guard duty and a few of those things. And then of course I went down to the Holon for the maneuvers, and then I was a rifleman there because we were living out in the, out in the woods there, forest, and so I was a rifleman, and of course went through all the training down there, and then back up to Hale, Fort Ord, up to Kiska.
And when you're up in Kiska, why don't you describe to me a little bit about what you went through on the way to Kiska?
Well, of course, that was a fiasco, as you well know. And we'd practiced landings up and down the coast of California there before we went up there. because we went to Fort Ord. And then, of course, we landed August 15th at 5 o'clock in the morning from the LSTs or LCTs, I never can remember. And then, of course, the fog came in, the wind came up, and we worked our way up into the Japanese trenches. And, of course, everyone thought the Japs were still there, but actually Japs had left 14 days before. And, of course, during the night, some of the 7th Division was moved in above us. And I'm not sure that we knew they were there or they knew that we were there. But anyway, the firing broke out, and due to inexperience, as the colonel later said at the funeral or at the burial, fog, rain, they were shooting at stones, and then, of course, the major of the 3rd Battalion, whether he was not well informed or became, I don't know, scared or something, we called for a squad from my company to come over because he thought he was being attacked. Well, of course, there was more shooting there, and 3, 4 very good friends of mine were killed that night. In fact, the supply sergeant, as close as you are to me, was killed instantly. And so then due to that, I got into the supply, became armorer and artificer. And finally things quieted down, and eventually we came home from Kiska, back to Hale.
What were you thinking when, on Kiska, when the fighting was, or the shooting was going on?
It was very terrifying. There was no commands much, and so I just stayed where I was, and finally the daylight came and things calmed down, and we moved out of that position over to Lily Lake, I believe, stayed there overnight, and then eventually, of course, they dug in for the pyramidal tents, I believe they called them, and a few Quonset huts, and finally December 17th, we came home, came over to Ketchikan, Alaska, down at Prince Rupert, and from there by truck down to Camp Carson.
And when you stayed on Kiska, what was it like to live on Kiska for that time?
Well, of course, actually, most fellows thought it was terrible, but I've seen some of the most beautiful scenes up there with a volcano in the back, and then the wind would ripple this purple grass, which grew up about that high, and you could see the wind coming down from the mountain. And then one morning we woke up and it had snowed a little, and here are all these peaks out in the ocean with a white on them. And it was absolutely beautiful.
Did you take pictures?
No, but I have a lot. Oh dear. George Earle, are you familiar with him? He was in our company, and an artist, of course. And I have a complete set of the watercolors that he did, and a lot of photographs.
And once Kiska was over and you kind of worked your way back?
They brought us directly back to Ketchikan by ship, and by ship to Prince Rupert, train 5 days, I guess, that we were on, coming back to Camp Carson.
So did you have a sense that you had been tested?
Oh, you know, I don't have feelings like that, I don't think, but probably due to the fire and so forth, we were more experienced, at least, the few of us who were up there, yes.
What would you characterize as the mood of the returning troops? Well,
of course, there were some jokes from others who were not in the 87th that it had been messed up, which we knew it was. But I think there was probably a sense of, well, more seriousness about it. I really don't know. See, I was not a rifleman. I was always either in the orderly room or in the supply. So it was a little different not being in a rifle squad.
Do you think the experience at Kiska somehow framed what was to come?
Well, you know, well, I think so. The major was relieved, and officers were moved around, and probably, yes, at a higher level, probably.
Do you think it perhaps shaped your attitude on more training that was to come at Hale?
Well, see, being in supply, we weren't out on. I did go on a week of the D series, and several marches and so forth, and all the skiing I could get in, even on the weekends. So I don't know. It's a little different doing that because we're constantly issuing clothing and really a different thought all the time is keeping the company outfitted as it should be and so forth. I did go through the rifle training, rappelling, just to get it on my record, I guess they did.
Did you have a sense that your job in supply was vital in keeping things moving?
Oh, sure. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
What was kind of your own sense of personal mission from your position there?
That we had to do, you mean? Well, of course, it's issuing all the clothing, the rifles, the ammunition. We did not. That always came from ordnance. And the clothing, the bedding, and of course there were always inspections to be sure that our supply room was in proper shape and clean.
What was your own personal sense of how you fit in with what was riflemen needed? Did you have a sense that it was important?
Oh yes, of course, yes.
Tell me a little bit about your favorite memories of Hale.
Well, I liked Hale, unlike many who did not. I had a very good friend in Denver. I went in many, many times. In fact, as I stayed at his house Monday night. And of course, I love to go skiing. In fact, I was working in the oil room the first year, second room supply. But the first year, I would have half a day skiing on my own. And then I was not an instructor, but the kitchen help asked me if I would instruct them. So all you had to do was tie a white handkerchief around your arm. So I was gone from the oil room all day long. But that only lasted a couple of weeks. Then the first sergeant caught up with me. So I had to go back to work.
Did you ever think your typing skills would come in so handy?
Yeah, no, I had no ideas that I would be typing in service. Although I worked a month in Fort Niagara in the life insurance section, and I think that probably followed along on my record because I did some typing at Camp Roberts and at Lewis and so forth.
And what sort of privileges did being a good typer bring you?
I was never on the KP or guard list because I made those lists out.
And once you went over to Italy, tell me a little bit about what your memories are.
Well, I loved Italy. We've been back 12 times since then. We have several friends over there.
Let me just hold up for 1 second.
Sure.
I don't know why this guy keeps driving by. It's driving me crazy.
That's a loud car.
It's a kid in a Volkswagen with a loud muffler. Okay, let's pick it up now.
And I always loved the history. And of course, that's where most of it started. And being in Rome, Florence especially, and even up in the mountain towns to see how Italy really was. We have many friends up to the mountain towns now.
Now, when you think about how Italy is now and how you remember it during the war, how about if you sort of compare and contrast?
Oh, beautiful now. And of course, during the war, the ruined buildings and the people with their pails for food, you know, after we had chow, you know, and the destruction of the bridges is just terrible.
During the war, what was your impression of how much destruction there was?
Well, the villages we were in, and I have pictures of them at home, were, well, just torn apart, you know. Gaggio, Montana. Villiciatico, where I Company was not harmed. And Lizzano, I'm not sure, because I was not in Lizzano during the war.
What were the villages that you do remember sort of in shambles?
Oh, Gaggio, Montano, Tolli, San Benedetto, Po. And then beyond there, we moved so fast that I really don't remember much of that.
What were those villages like?
Well, they were small. You mean the...
Say Gaggio, Montana.
Oh, well, there was nothing left in the middle of it there. The only thing there was the bell tower of the church that was left, but everything around was gone. Tolli was very, very small, and there was nothing left there very much. And let's see, any other ones? Well, Positore was pretty well demolished, and that's where the final drive started, at least for I Company.
What happened starting there for I Company?
Well, that was the beginning of the April drive there. And I always remember that we had an ammunition dump right there. And one of the flyers came in and thought it was not American, dropped a bomb. Fortunately, the whole thing didn't explode. One of our officers ran out, threw a blanket over it, and extinguished what little fire there was there.
That could have been a big boom.
It could have been a real explosion, yes.
Now, once you were on the move, moving to Po Valley, tell me a little bit about what happened to you then.
Well, I was left behind almost every day to be with the fellows coming back from the hospitals and being with the food and so forth to bring up at night. And they reached the Po, and they came back to get me. And it was in the afternoon, I think, and I Company went across. And then we got across all right, and then the supply officer said, well, you go back and get the jeeps. Well, it was about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I went back where I came across, and there was no boats there. So I went down the river, finally got across, and it became dark, and I didn't know where I was, had no idea. But finally this bridging engineer outfit came along, and the captain told me jump in the truck. And I did, and they went on be up the river. And he said, it was totally dark now, 9 or 10 o'clock. He said, this is as far as I'm going. So I dropped off, and lucky thing, here was a Jeep with I-87th on it. So, and we didn't have to go back across that night. So I was very lucky that night.
As they moved across after the Po, what happened?
Well, of course, it seemed though we stayed over on the North Bank one night, and then they began to move on up. And I always remember, before we got to the Po, coming to a crossroads of roads, and the artillery was firing this way, and they were firing straight ahead. So we were way out ahead, and I believe that, Fifth Army wanted George H to stop the advance, and he had a few words I will not repeat here, and they continued all the way up to Garda.
Did you go all the way up to Garda?
Oh, yes. And as soon as we got there, I think there were Germans up on the right, and so we went on up there, and I was with a company at this time, but somehow there was no action. We came back down, and then we finally went up to Navina, which was a tiny town at that time, and that's where we stayed for, maybe a couple of nights. I've kind of forgotten about that. And eventually we went on up through the tunnels up to Riva.
Now, did you actually go through the tunnels, or did you go around the tunnels in a duck?
No, I went through the tunnels. the few that, of course, on the east side there aren't that many tunnels. Seems though we went through maybe a couple. And then, of course, there was when Darby was killed, was it Colonel Darby? Colonel Darby was killed, and that was up above us. I heard the explosion, but I never knew what happened until afterwards.
Did you meet much resistance as you were coming up the side?
No. And of course, the Germans were going up the west side of the lake, and our artillery was firing over across. I could see that, of course.
Could you see people in the ducks?
I never saw those people. No, for some reason, maybe my memory's not too good either on that. I'm not sure.
Were you thinking the end was near?
Oh, it had to be. I mean, we were through the Germans, really, except we didn't know what was up in the Alps or the Dolomites. The redoubts, so-called, I guess.
Were you seeing many Germans coming, surrendering or
Well,
captured?
nearly all the way up through there would be the Germans, captured Germans coming back. But I never saw them in combat because, see, I was always back on a road where we had supply or something like that. And other than being shelled a few times, I was never in the machine gun or rifle fire.
So as you were progressing and Germans were coming back, did you have a sense that it was a lot of Germans?
No, there were many. At times it varied, of course, depending where we were. But there were a great many of them, yes.
Can you sort of characterize what their mood was?
No, because I never, they were going this way and I was going that way, so never had any chance to talk.
I have a question, if you don't
No,
mind.
right here.
How did this whole supply thing work? Did you have a big truck that you brought stuff all the way
No,
up to
we had
Naples,
a,
or-
no.
Talk to her. Don't
Oh,
talk to me,
we had Jeeps with trailers, and they bring it from division to regiment to battalion, and then we go back. Or I guess it was always to regiment. They didn't break it down to battalion. And then we would go back and pick up what we needed, bring it back, and issue it to the fellows in the company.
Did people get what they needed fairly quickly?
Oh, yes, we tried to supply them. A lot of it at night that we would take up to the fellows.
So guys were probably pretty glad to see you guys.
Yes, that's especially with food and gasoline for the Coleman stoves and so forth, the white gas.
Now traveling at night, did you always have a sense of where you were going?
Oh, yes, we had to know where we were going to take it to the company, sure.
It would seem like it might be easy to get lost. Did you?
Well, at night we didn't have to go that far. We'd be down on old Highway 64 there, and of course our fellows were up on Belvedere and on up and so forth.
Never got lost?
No, never got lost. No, because it was we were always in a comparatively small area, A company does not occupy, unless they're stretched very thin, they don't occupy a huge amount of land, not 8 or 10 miles or anything like that. So.
From your time in the 10th, how could you say that it transformed you personally?
Well, I don't know. I had a family back home, son, and of course thoughts were concentrated on getting back and going to work and so forth. But just I don't say the wonderment of the people in the 10th, and my exposure to, college people, skiers, it was just wonderful.
What kind of people are in the 10th?
Pardon me?
What kind of people are in the 10th?
Are in?
What kind of people are in the 10th?
Oh, wonderful people.
What makes them wonderful?
Well, teachers, instructors, and where Bob Dole's gotten to, and governor, sergeant of Massachusetts, and just very, very high level. Bankers, writers.
Is there a certain kind of attitude that sort of typifies a 10th Mountain Soldier?
Well, it's a comradeship. It really is. And I come from a very small town, and if it weren't for the 10th, I really don't know what I would do. Because I'm always writing or phoning or going to meetings and so forth. It's a wonderful organization.
How did it make you different?
Well, I think more love of the mountains and the outdoors. I was in Boy Scouts, Scoutmaster, which we did a little bit, but nothing like getting into these places, you know, and so forth. It's a wonderful exposure. And going back to Italy, you know, and seeing friends and going with the people that I know in the association. And my son is a treasurer of the descendants, so we have a very close connection, and he does too, with the 10th.
Can you think of anything else that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think that covers everything. It's just wonderful to be with everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.